and I'm thrilled for the first time to have a guest on this live event. Today is not just going to be me talking at you, it's going to be a conversation with Jake Stahl. Jake, I'm glad you're here, man. Thanks for joining me for this.
Hey, William, thanks for letting me break new ground with you. This is fantastic.
I think it's going to be great for us to talk about something that is near and dear to both our hearts, and that is authentic communication. We know that there are people who want to be transformative leaders, and communication is such a big piece of that. You talk so much about this, Jake, and I just had you on the podcast recently diving deep into your communication principles. I think you're going to add so much value today to this conversation.
Thank you, William. You know, I think the thing about communication and authentic communication is we communicate all the time, but I think the amount of times we do it authentically is just, it's almost non-existent.
Why do you think communication is so difficult? I mean, we do it all the time. We start doing it when we're, well, toddlers. Why is this so difficult? Why do people struggle with this?
I think B.F. Skinner probably said it the best. He was a psychologist, Harvard taught, and he said free will is an illusion. We're all actually just one big bundle of preconditioned responses to things that take place every day. And those responses have garnered us good results in the past. So they're going to continue to do that in the future. And I think communication has a lot of that. You know, somebody's angry, so that entitles me to be angry back. Or maybe it entitles me to be super empathetic and maybe overcompensating. Or somebody says, hi, how are you? So my conditional response is, fine, thanks. How are you? And if we think about how much we're conditioned to do and how much we fall into that conditioning, communication is just that. I mean, I know your whole audience is going to understand if somebody says, I love you, conditional response is, I love you too. Somebody says in a store, can I help you? Conditional response is, no, thanks, just looking. I think we rely on the conditioning so much that authenticity tends to get lost almost immediately in some of our conversations.
How do we overcome that type of conditioning? Because I think we all struggle with what you're describing. We just have these autopilot responses. You know, it's almost like when you get in the car and you drive somewhere and then you're arriving and you're like, I don't remember really driving to get here. It's just autopilot. That's what that sounds like, what you're describing. We're just kind of on autopilot in our communication. How do you break free of that gravitational pull?
It's a great question, William. And I'm not sure if we ever really 100% do that, because the first part of it is recognition. And as you know, when you have a conditioned response, a lot of times you don't even recognize that you're doing it until somebody parrots it back to you. One thing I say in conversations a lot is the word so. It's almost a transition for me. And I wasn't aware of it until one day somebody pointed it out to me. I was like, wow, I didn't even realize I was really doing that. So I think part of it, William, is let's just take the example of, hi, how are you? The next time you go through your day, make a note of how many times people say it to you and what your response is, and how many times you say it to other people and what their response is. So I think part of it is just like any problem. It's almost recognition that it's even there.
That's interesting that you didn't notice that until somebody pointed it out to you. You know, isn't that true in so many areas of our lives that you can't see the whole picture when you're in the frame? I know as a speaker, I watch video of myself speaking, not because I love to look at myself, because I really can't stand watching that video. But that's how I learn to see things that nobody else is going to tell me about. That's how I learn gestures and facial expressions that are distracting or annoying.
Yeah.
Because nobody else is going to tell me those things. But the camera functions as an outside perspective. And I can see things that I wouldn't see any other way. Do you find that to be true with this, that other people can help you to notice those things that you may never notice on your own?
Yeah, I do. And it's funny because I have a deal with my friends, and I only ever really associate with people who are pretty much just cut to the chase people. The older
I
I
like
get, the
that.
more I realize I
That's
don't
good.
have time for the people who are just going to
Seriously,
bolster my ego.
who's got time to waste, right? Come on, let's get to it.
Yeah. And I think here's the danger, William, is we all think to ourselves, well, so I have a conditional response.
Yeah.
No big deal. Everybody does it. What's the problem?
Hmm.
Well, the problem is we can tee up a response that may not be in our favor. Take a salesperson, for example. If I call up as a salesperson, I say, hey, William, how are you today? You know it's not genuine. I know it's not genuine. And now you know that a sales presentation is going to follow that. And we all know it. So if I can break my own conditioning, I can also break that condition response with the other person. Because as soon as I say, hi, how are you? It's Jake Stahl from Jake Stahl Consulting. You automatically start coming up with stuff in your head. I've already got one. I bought one yesterday. I have to talk to my partner. This costs too much. It's not the right time of year, right? All those condition responses come into play. So the best thing I can do as a salesperson is to break your conditioning immediately so that all of those things don't come into your head. And although we make it sound simple, this is extraordinarily difficult because it requires us to look at what we're doing to create that response with somebody else. And to give an even different perspective on that, the best way I can think of to describe conditioning is your cell phone rings. You look at the phone number and you go, I just don't have time for you today. And you decide to ignore the call. That's how strong conditioning is it makes our decision for us.
So give me an example of what you just described, right? When you're starting a conversation with somebody and your initial thought, your initial flow, the autopilot is, so how you do it? You're like, no, I want to break that. I want to break it. How do you break that? Like, what's another way that you see is effective in establishing more authentic communication?
Well, one of the ways is to take an immediate interest in that other person. And honestly, I'm amazed constantly that we're in an environment where people will reshare a cat video that they found amusing, but they will not look up a little bit of information on the person they're about to talk to on the phone and do a little pre-homework. So let's say you and I were communicating for the first time. You pick up the phone. William, it's Jake Stahl. I am so glad you picked up. I've listened to your podcast numerous times. And honestly, I have other stuff I want to talk about, but I'd first love to ask you a couple of questions. Immediately, you're like, you listen to my podcast?
Yeah.
And you have questions? Wow, that's great.
That's good.
I do this with people all the time. I never ask, how are you? But I did this with somebody the other day. I was like, man, I'm glad you picked up. Thank you for taking time with a Zoom call. I was looking forward to talking to you. And the person's first reaction was, you were? Why? So, and I meant it, but it's amazing how when we kick people out of that conditioning, how much it changes things. Do this at a meeting. You're at a networking event. Instead of saying, hi, how are you? Say, man, I was looking forward to meeting you. I saw your LinkedIn profile. Tell me what I don't read on LinkedIn. Give me some inside scoop. All of a sudden, that person's off to the races and you're the hero. And what did it take? A little bit of pre-homework on my part? It's amazing how much that opens the lines of communication.
Yeah, it feels like it has to start, though, with that being who you really are, with you really being that curious, others-focused person. It feels like that has to be the first step if you want to be authentic in your communication and in your leadership. You've got to start there. Does that resonate?
Well, William, let's unpack that a little bit. Oftentimes I'll hear people say, I'm not a salesperson or I'm not a storyteller. And then they'll go off and tell me a story about how they're not a storyteller. Or somebody will say, I'm not a salesperson. Then they'll go and sell me on why they're not a salesperson.
Wow.
So if we unpack what you're talking about a little bit, I think the implication, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're saying is you have to be a natural listener, naturally inquisitive in order to be able to do this. Is that what you're
Hmm.
saying?
It feels like if I'm going to go there in a conversation, if it's gonna come across as authentic, that has to be authentically who I am to start there. It feels like that. Now, again, help me understand what you're saying, because I get this can be a habit that you build into, and that it can be something that you do that transforms who you are. It can work the other direction. But talking about authenticity always makes me want to start inside.
I think that's a great point. So let's talk about then the transferal of authenticity. And I think this will answer your
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
You will a lot of times see a leader that separates their communication style from how they are at home to how they are in business because they feel as though they need to make that transition. So
Sure.
that same person that doesn't want to be, let's say, naturally inquisitive or naturally authentic with a business associate will then go home and say to his significant other or her significant other, how's your day today?
Hmm.
What did you think of that person? So I heard you talk to your sister. How did that go? Oh, what do you mean? She said A, B, and C. So I think when we're saying they're not naturally authentic or they're not naturally inquisitive, what we're really saying is they haven't transferred that skill from areas where they are that normally or situations where they are that normally into the business environment.
Hmm.
I think we see this a lot with salespeople. You will get a salesperson that may be the most kind, empathetic, caring listener that they could possibly be at home or with their friends. But when they get on a call, it's like, ram it down the throat. I need a sale. You need to sign today. So they haven't transferred from A to B.
Yeah.
So I think I would argue back that we are all that way inherently. We just don't
Hmm.
always transfer that from personal to professional.
I get that. I think that makes sense. As business owners and leaders, and this is a lot of the people who are watching this or listening to this today. These are business owners. These are agency owners. These are leaders in the context where they work. And there's so many things that we throw at leaders, and we're like, you got to work on this. 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 You got to be this. And I get the overwhelming nature of that. To me, authenticity feels like it has to start with who you are and who you are becoming. We talk a lot in communication about how a leader's words weigh more. A mentor of mine, Andy Stanley, says that a leader's words weigh 10,000 pounds, whether you want them to or not.
Right.
You weigh in on a conversation, you weigh in on a topic, your words weigh more, and they can build up or they can crush. The authenticity of a leader, then, the authenticity of a business owner has to come through in how they're communicating and in what they're communicating. Yeah, I think about a story I heard once about Mahatma Gandhi. And Gandhi's known for so many different things, but this one was around authenticity. A mom brought her child to Gandhi and said, "Gandhi, Mahatma, please tell my child to stop eating sugar." And Gandhi said, "Come back in 3 days." So she left and came back 3 days later. And Gandhi told the child, "Stop eating sugar." And the mom said, "Thank you, Mahatma, but may I ask why we had to come back 3 days later? Why couldn't you have just said that the first time? Why do we have to come back?" And he said, "Ma'am, because 3 days ago I was still eating sugar.
I like that.
I have to communicate from that place of being authentic, a place of being and living out what it is that I'm communicating. Otherwise, there's going to be a disconnect in integrity. There's going to be a disconnect between what I say and how I live." This is what I think about when I think about authentic communication. I think about there's got to be an alignment. There's got to be an integrity. But I know that there are skills that you can begin to develop even while you are still moving toward becoming. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And I would agree. In my head, the word authentic falls into the same word as listen, concentrate, focus. It's words we throw around without a specific meaning. So in other words, if I say to you, William, you really need to focus. Okay, well, what does that look like?
What's that mean?
You know, you need to concentrate. All right,
Yeah.
well, what does that look like? And as business leaders, we're taught that you're building a business so it will be successful.
Yeah.
Okay, so how is success defined? What does that look like? And I think authenticity falls into that same type of thing. You know, what does authenticity look like? So, William, you and I seem to have probably the same definition, which is speaking with realism and being true and honest and fair and saying what's on your mind without saying it in a way that could be considered offensive or bristly.
Yeah.
But I think authenticity may mean different things for different people. So I'm not sure.
That's interesting.
Right?
For me, credibility is what's at stake.
Okay.
You know, authenticity to me means you're speaking from a place of credibility. It's hard for me to be credible speaking about something I don't know.
Very true.
You know, nobody asked me to come and speak about growing a beautiful lawn. Nobody has ever asked me to come speak about that. And there's a reason for that, because I'm still figuring that out. I'm still trying to learn how to do that exactly, right? Nobody asked me to speak about that. I have no credibility in that area. But the things that I do speak about are things where I've got some track. You know, I've got some experience. I've got some training, some education. I've got some credibility that I can bring to that conversation. To me, that's where authenticity lives. That's where it bursts forth from a person that carries that credible space into the conversation with a team member, with a client, with a prospect. It doesn't matter. But as a business owner, understanding that, and you're coming in already with your words heavier, right? If you don't walk in with heavy words and credibility, there's going to be something that's missing that everybody's going to notice. They may not be able to put a finger on it, but they're going to feel it. You get that?
I do. And I agree with you 100%. I think I would add in, just thinking about it now from that perspective, I would add in, to me, authenticity is being who you are. So in other words, there's a lot to be said for a public speaker that makes a mistake and acknowledges it. It makes them remarkably human and more in touch with the audience, and it makes them authentic. So I think, to me, the credibility factor adds on to the just not being someone that you're not. We talk about faking it until you make it. I would suggest authenticity is just being able to tell people, I haven't quite made it. This isn't my area.
Yeah.
And I'm just laying it out there for you to know. So to go with your example, somebody says, I'd like you to come talk about lawns. And you're like, I can do that, but have you seen my lawn?
Right. Yeah, maybe you don't want me. Maybe you want Jake. Jake can talk about lawns.
No, you haven't seen my lawn either. You definitely don't want
me. So are there tools or skills or techniques that can help leaders, business leaders, and agency owners can help them to move toward authentic communication with team members, with clients, with prospective clients? Are there things that we can be mindful of, that we can intentionally work on?
Yeah, one of the things I always suggest to people that I coach is before you go into a meeting where you're going to be leading the meeting and have a diatribe, or where you're going to be trying to impart a certain message, is write it out in advance. Look at what you're going to say before you say it, and then think about it from an audience member's point of view. So, I'm going to be having 12 members in my audience. How are they going to take this if I read this as is? Because I was reading a book the other day, the name of the author slips me, but he was basically saying that communication is an apology game. We tend to not think about what we're going to say. We tend to just spew what's on our mind. And then if something comes across poorly, we use the apology to just double back and restate it in a different way. Now, that's a clear oversimplification, but it brings up an interesting point that a lot of times we'll go to do something really important or talk about something really important, and we'll just wing it. Or we'll write an email and we'll just send it off right away. When if we were to write it down, then look at it the next day, we may take it from a totally different tact. We've all sent that text message that we wish we could get back. We've all sent that email that somebody said, this is the way I read it. And you thought, I could see that. I could see how you could take it that way. And we want to take it back. So I would say that part of communicating authentically is knowing what you're going to communicate and giving yourself a day to sleep on. Alice in Wonderland has a great thought to it. And she says, I don't know how you could judge me on what I said yesterday because I'm not the same person that I was yesterday.
So
and
good.
Again, drastic oversimplification.
Yeah.
But if we want to communicate authentically, we want to think about how authentic that is. In other words, if I'm in another mood and I read this, am I going to view it differently? And I would argue, William, that a lot of the times we probably will.
That is such good advice. And I don't think there's a person listening who can't remember a time when they wish they had followed that. Starting with this guy. I can think of times that I have fired something off or sent something off or said something in a moment that had I just taken 5, 10, 20 minutes or slept on it overnight, I would have done that differently. I would have spoken different words there. I might not have spoken at all. And I think that's part of learning and growing as a leader. One of the things that I would challenge our viewers and listeners right now to is, it's easy to think about those fails. And that's the first thing I thought of as you were describing that. I was like, oh man, yeah, I can think of that, all these things. It's easy to think about that, right? Don't live there, right? You can't change the past, right? But you can commit in the present to change the future. You can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to establish this as a new habit. I'm setting down a new marker here. And going forward, I'm going to begin to apply this. And in that moment, when I do want to fire, wait a minute. I'm going to take a minute. That's such great counsel.
One of the things I tell my clients a lot is you never write your own text. You never write your own email. You never write your own direct message. The person that's reading it writes it in their head, and they write it from their perspective, the mood that they're in, the situation they were in that day. If I am in a great mood, William, and I read a message you sent me today, I'm going to read it much differently than if tomorrow morning my dog dies and I read your message in the afternoon. It's going to be two different readings. Yeah. And no matter what you put in there, I write it. I write it and read it out loud in my head.
That's right.
And I will say openly that I don't always follow my own advice, and I do send emails times without that perspective. And I think that's where some big breakdowns can start to take place, is we assume people are hearing it and listening to it as we meant it when we say it and when we write it. So part of that is the authenticity factor too, is how well am I communicating it? And what kind of grace am I giving the other person when they read it for their interpretation?
I think that's so wise to think about how it's going to be received, to think about how they're going to hear it or read it. And so often we don't do that with communication.
No.
We're too busy thinking about the next thing we want to say, right? We're too busy making sure that we said it the way we want to say it to communicate everything we've got to say, instead of thinking about the other side of it. That feels like a part of communication that's not taught much.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The words like focus and concentrate and success and listen, we're
Yeah.
never really given a chance to break those things down and understand what they mean to us. And therefore, it's hard to teach. We'll tell our
Hmm.
child, focus in school, or you got to listen to your teacher. But we never
Right.
really, I shouldn't say we never, I don't want to make a sweeping statement. I never really broke it down to the kids and said, this is how you listen.
Yeah.
This is how you focus. This is how you concentrate. So I take responsibility for that factor.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think communication in general, again, it's the apology factor. I'll say what I have to say now. Hope you get it. And if you don't, sorry, this is actually what I meant.
Yeah, and thinking about that, about, being honest about when you mess up. I think about communication too when it comes to authenticity, not just sharing your wins. Sharing your wins is important. That's part of building credibility as somebody who knows what you're talking about, what you're communicating. But if all you ever do is share your wins, if you are always the hero of your own story, does that really feel authentic? Who only wins all the time? I think part of being an authentic communicator, particularly with your team here, but also with clients, I think part of being authentic is being honest about where you screw up.
It definitely humanizes you. Social psychologists did a study on this, and they put two people in front of an audience. And one was a person who was kind of slovenly, unkempt. They were on a game show and they got a bunch of questions wrong and they spilled the coffee and they said, what's your perception of this person? And it was universally negative, just not a good person. The feedback was terrible. Then they put a very prominent public speaker in front of them, and that prominent public speaker spilled coffee on themselves. And they said, what's your perception of them? And they said, well, he just made a mistake. He's human.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that the humanness is a big factor. And as people who are leaders, I think it's crucial that we show people we do make mistakes. And it makes you more approachable. It makes you more likable. But universally, I think the opinion is that if I make a mistake, I'm letting people down.
Wow. And reality is so different.
It is. It's
right.
Dramatically different. Sure.
When I'm honest with my team and I say, oh, wait, this one was on me. I screwed that up. That's on me. Their trust level goes up.
Dramatically. Yeah.
If trust goes up, and trust is one of the greatest tools that a leader or business owner can have with their team in particular. If your trust goes up, what does that do to your authenticity when you're communicating?
Well, it makes you more believable.
Even though you screwed up.
Think about politics. Politics always has this spin on something terrible happened, but this is the great reason that their terrible thing happened. Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't vote
That's
for
true.
the guy or gal that came up and they said, listen, I screwed this one up. My apologies, we'll fix it. But, this was all on me. I think I would vote for that person automatically.
Yeah, that's so true. And so rare, if I may.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen it.
But let's not just pick on the political leaders. I think it can be rare in business owners too.
Yeah.
There's a reticence to want to own our failures. But I think to get better, you have to own what's yours to own. You have to say, hey, you know what? Hey, that was me. I screwed that up.
And it's funny, William, there's a slightly different take on this too, in that admitting you can't do something increases your authenticity. It's well known in the psychology field that if you say to somebody you can't do something, that it makes that person believe you more and trust in you more. because you're not the overall problem solver. And a great example is I own a historic home and recently had to redo a stove in our kitchen. And I needed refractory cement, something that could take really high heat. So I went to a big box store and I said to the guy, need refractory cement. Could you please tell me where you have that? He goes, right here, but the place down the road carries something better quality and at a lower price. Now, most people would say, well, that person just shot themselves in the foot and I'd fire that employee. I got to tell you, I'm dying to go back to that big box store.
Yeah.
You had the courtesy and the wherewithal to tell me the best way to spend my dollar and get the highest quality. You know I'm going back to that place.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And probably looking for that guy.
Right, exactly right. Exactly. I think a lot of leaders would look at that and say, you know, you lost a sale for us.
Yeah.
But I think basic psychological principles would say you gained a relationship out of that and therefore future sales. And that to me is a hallmark of authenticity, is being able to say and do the right thing and guide people in the right direction.
You know, I think people listening may be pushing back just a little bit and saying, yeah, but I've got a bottom line to think about. And I think what you just said really keys into this. This is going to be reflected on the bottom line.
Yeah.
If you are authentic, that type of communication, you're going to see the effect of that.
Yeah. And I agree with you, William, that could be a pushback, but let me give an alternative version of that. Is if you do that and you recommend them to somebody else, they're going to look at you as a valuable source. And that person you refer to them to is going to look at you as a giver and as a referrer. And that's going to pay back 1,000-fold, not in revenue right now, but probably in revenue or referrals later on. Where if you do something with that person you may not do your best at, and you cause a scene where maybe the end result isn't what everybody pictured, that person's going to tell 30 people not to trust you and not to do that thing. So I agree. It may not show monetary yield right away.
Yeah.
But I think the business yield overall to you in the long run is going to be 100 times what you would have earned fiscally.
So knowing everything we've talked about, what stops us from moving into more authentic communication? What are the barriers? What's the reason people don't do it?
I think one of the biggest reasons, William, is that we don't take the time to invest in what the other person wants. And I'll give you a great example. I hear all the time that companies are putting out an incentive program, and it's gift cards and it's gift certificates. And one company just said, we give out Starbucks cards as a reward for A, B, and C. Now, on the surface, that may sound great. But for those people like me who don't have a Starbucks nearby or don't drink coffee and don't necessarily like their tea, there's no incentive for me. So I think part of it is we don't take the time to look at the motivators for a person. Are they motivated by money, recognition, doing the right thing, the love of the game? Once we find out that motivator, how deep do we go to really find out what they want? Because this is a bottom line. What does a person really want from interacting with you? The example I always use, William, is weight loss is such a big thing. You know, Ozempic is out and everybody's big into the weight loss. I would argue, William, that nobody on the history of the planet has ever wanted to lose weight. Ever. What they've wanted was to fit in a swimsuit they couldn't fit in since college. Was to get in jeans that they've grown out of since last year. Was to get a compliment from somebody on the beach, or to be able to play with their grandchild on the floor and not have their knees creak when they get up. There's an old adage that you don't buy a drill bit, you buy the hole. I would argue it takes a step further. If you're drilling a hole to hang a picture, you're not buying the hole. You're buying the ambiance of the room that picture is going to hang in. So I think it goes even a little bit further than just the hole. When we start to take the time to find out what people are really interested in a conversation, whether it's personal or business, is I think when communication really starts. Because until then, you're just selling Ozempic. Until then, you're just selling a personal trainer, or you're selling a weight loss plan.
Yeah.
But when you sell a solution, it should be a solution to their dream outcome, not to their surface outcome. And let's face it, the only reason we communicate with each other is to get to some sort of end, whether it's to be happy, sad, motivated, built up, broken down. That's the end result, right?
That is what we're after. That's so well said. Jake, as always, every time we talk, I walk away thinking, man, I could have gone for another hour.
This was a
I
lot of
learned
fun, as always.
so much. Our conversations just are so encouraging, and I always walk away having learned something. And my goal today is for our listeners and viewers also to have walked away learning at least one thing. I imagine many are going to have a page full of notes. Jake and I are both available to help you take the next step with your business, with your leadership, and with your communication. We want to help you get better. That's why we do events like this. That's why we do the coaching that we do. Jake, somebody wants to connect with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
They can connect with me right here on LinkedIn. There's a million Jake Stalls on here, but there's only one that looks like me. So pick that one. And the other way they can get in touch with me is through my website, jakestallconsulting.com. And if they want, they can book a free hour with me and see how we can help.
And I'll say the same thing. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Just look for William C. Attaway. And we'll have those links in the description below. You can go to my website, catalyticleadership.net, and book a call with me. And I would love to help you discover what it is that you can grow in. How can we strategically think about the struggles and challenges that you're having so we can help you get past them? I want to help you move from where you are to where you want to be. That's why we do what we do. Hope this has been helpful again, and we'll look forward to seeing you the next time we do this.
Thanks, William. This was a great pioneering experience, so we'll see how it goes.